It's been a dream of most Americans to not pay their taxes for a variety of reasons. And I stand with my libertarian brothers and sisters in their exasperation over the convoluted tax system that we have in the United States. And now what we're seeing is many liberals. They are saying they will no longer pay taxes so long as that money is funding wars and ICE. And you know what I say? Go and do it, because those 80,000 IRS agents that Joe Biden hired, well, we got to arrest somebody. And fortunately, we have all these people. I'm kidding, by the way. I don't think they actually hired like law enforcement IRS people. And didn't they fire a bunch of them anyway? Well, the liberals are saying, if my money is going to fund ICE, which is evil, and wars, why should I pay? Tax protests have been called for forever. Probably every single night on Timcast IRL, we get someone calling for a tax protest saying we should stop paying our taxes. Yeah, well, it's an ethical conundrum because morally speaking, I think the right thing to do is not to contribute to a dysfunctional system. But my friends, I am a reformer and not a revolutionary. And as I often say, my view of things isn't to just disrupt and break the whole system apart because we're upset about a lot of things. It's to fight for those things that we want to see that are good. And throughout history, we are constantly beset on all sides by negatives and failed policy, but we have consistently, for a long period of time, done good. I mean, like literal moral good, and we've done well for ourselves. So I look at it like, I'm more for reform. I think we can win elections. I think we can win political power. I think we need to fight for culture, and we won't need to do these things. But don't get me wrong. The sentiment is there, and I largely agree with the general idea of the tax system is broken. It doesn't do what you think it's supposed to do. It's largely about pulling money from the system to deal with inflation because the government spends money anyway, regardless of whether or not they have the revenue to do it. But let's take a look at what these liberals are up to and why many of them are going to end up in prison. The Guardian reports, meet the Americans withholding their federal income tax to protest against Trump. Some U.S. taxpayers are refusing to pay the federal government amid ICE surges, the war with Iran, and more. The Guardian writes, quote, I'm not paying my federal income tax this year, Rachel Cohen declared in a recent Instagram video that received more than 140,000 likes. The 31-year-old lawyer in Chicago plans to put the $8,800 she owes the federal government in a high-yield savings account instead. She doesn't want to fund wars in Iran and Gaza or immigration agents detaining her neighbors, she said. Many commenters said they wanted to do the same. Others worried about her. Quote, I've got a lot of people saying, Rachel, this is illegal, Cohen said. To which I say with gentleness, I am a competent attorney. You're going to go to jail. What are you talking about? Excuse me. Cohen is part of a new generation of Americans refusing to pay some or all of their federal income taxes. It's not a new form of dissent. One of the first protests in the U.S. was, after all, a protest of unfair taxation. But it's also one that's gaining steam as Americans reject how their tax dollars are being spent under Trump. Lincoln Rice, who leads the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, said in Donald Trump's second term, more and more people are removing their money from the federal tax base. In January, NWTRCC, well, what an acronym, which has been around since the early 80s, held its largest ever War Tax Resistance 101 training. A few years ago, such trainings would draw about a dozen attendees. 2 months ago, nearly 500 people showed up, and the group's website traffic had over 110,000 unique visitors. Well, bravo. What I'm going to stress, however, is that you can see Rachel Cohen, these are leftists and libs who cheered for Joe Biden's massive expansion of the IRS. So I just find it all to be deeply hypocritical, not based in any actual ideology. No one is illegal on stolen land, this person says, and she can't tell you exactly what that means because she doesn't actually know who it was stolen from, nor will her or any other people give the land back to who they think it was taken from in the first place. I mean, maybe if they actually knew, they might, to be fair. The point is this. If you come at me with a coherent ideology and tell me, for this reason or another, I'm willing to do this thing or that, I'll say, okay, I understand what you're talking about. However, if you come at me and your ideology is incoherent, I'm going to ask you questions as to understanding what your ideology actually is and where the ideas come from. And if you cannot back them up, I'm just going to call you a hypocritical, aggressive, insane person. And I think, unfortunately, that's most people. And when you see how most people behave, you start to understand the Republican do-nothing rhino types and the Democrats, whose attitude is largely, the people are too stupid to decide for themselves, so we should decide for them. At least Michael Bloomberg said it. When Michael Bloomberg was campaigning for president, he outright said we should tax the poor because they're really dumb. Okay, well, at least he said it. Then fine. You want to put an IQ test on taxes? The smarter you are, the less you pay? Sure, do it. I'm not saying I'm the smartest guy on the planet or anything like that, but at least my taxes will go down. Quote, some methods of tax resistance are not legal, and anyone who attempts them should be prepared to face the risks of civil disobedience, Rice explains in his trainings. Penalties can range from threatening letters to wage or bank account garnishment to, in one famous case, the seizure of a person's home. There was also that very famous story where, I think it was in New Hampshire, tax protesters bunkered down in their house, and then the feds came and surrounded them, and it was a big deal. To Cohen, these risks are not deterrents when about 13% of Americans' federal income taxes are spent on military, and 1% goes to federal law enforcement, including subsidizing ICE. That's it. Literally 1%. Holy crap. It's also funny when you learn that the military is actually only 13%. So when these people are like, we're talking about $1 trillion, you're talking about 13% of the income tax base. Don't get me wrong, there's a deficit, which means they're spending more than they're bringing in. But I always thought that the military budget was substantially higher. Indeed, it's not. In a vacuum, I would certainly run the risk of a misdemeanor, as opposed to actively supporting concentration camps, she said, of ICE detention centers. Tax resistance was one of the earliest forms of protest. It goes back to 1773, the Boston Tea Party, when American colonists protested British taxation on tea imports. During the Depression era, hundreds of local and state level groups pushed back on tax abuse. One 3-year property tax strike in Chicago nearly bankrupted the city before it was struck down in court. I actually think the Boston Tea Party is misunderstood. It wasn't that, my understanding, let me look this up. It wasn't that they were taxing our tea. It's that they were giving preferential treatment to British tea or something, undermining the ability of U.S. Merchants to actually make money and generate. It was the passage of the Tea Act by Parliament, which allowed the East India Company to sell Chinese tea in the colonies without paying taxes. Yeah, I nailed it. A lot of people think that it was we're going to tax your tea. And it was no. They said cheap tea can be, this is really funny. This is really funny. Can we talk about the Tea Act real quick and talk about tariffs and all that jazz and talk about the similarities? Okay. The Tea Act of 1773 was an act of the Parliament of Great Britain. The principal objective was to reduce the maximum amount of tea held by the financially troubled British East India Trading Company and in London warehouses and to help the struggling company survive. A related objective was to undercut the price of illegal tea smuggled into Britain's North American colonies. This was intended to convince the colonists to purchase company tea on which the Townshend duties were paid, leading the colonists to implicitly agree to Parliament's right of taxation. Smuggled tea was a large issue for Britain and the East India Company, since approximately 86% of all tea in America at the time was smuggled Dutch tea. The act granted the company the right to directly ship its tea to North America and the right of the duty-free export of tea from Britain. Although tax imposed by the Townshend Acts and collected from the colonies remained in force, it received royal assent on May 10, 1773. Colonists in the 13 colonies recognized the implications of the Act's provisions, and a coalition of merchants, smugglers, and artisans similar to that which had opposed the Stamp Act of 1765 mobilized opposition to delivery distribution of the tea. The company's authorized consignees were harassed, and in many colonies, successful efforts were made to prevent the tea from being landed. In Boston, this resistance culminated in the Boston Tea Party, which, of course, we get it. Colonists boarded the tea ships in Anchor Harbor and dumped their tea in the cargo overboard. Parliamentary reaction to this event included the passage of the Coercive Acts designed to punish Massachusetts for its resistance, blah, 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 you get the point. Here's the point I'm making with all of this, my friends. The Crown was like, we are going to give preferential treatment for imported tea from these companies so that they can be sold at a discount. And right now in the United States, we have foreign companies importing products at a discount. And Donald Trump says we are going to stop that. It is an inversion. Imagine if the story was that Parliament said, if the East India Trading Company wants to bring tea into the colonies, they have to pay a tariff because we are going to allow teas, we're going to allow that competition. And to be fair, it's not one for one. There is some nuance here. The Dutch were illegally bringing tea in. So you could actually argue in either direction. I just think it's funny that right now Donald Trump is basically saying we don't want to undermine American interests and we want people to be able to buy American products. And then you actually have interesting similarities here that can go either direction. The East India Trading Company, which was British, was being undercut by cheap foreign substitutes. And the Crown was like, we're going to impose a tax, or in this instance, we're going to reduce the tax so they can bring this product in cheaper and compete. And there's interesting arguments as to what Trump is doing with tariffs, which could be viewed similarly in that, and again, like I say, it could go either way. From trying to allow the colonies to have their own products, right? to allowing cheap foreign products to be brought into the colonies. So I look at it like this. Anybody's going to make the argument that they want to make in terms of what fits their worldview. But I view the tariffs that Trump is doing as an effort to protect American industry and stop expanding an American industry based on foreign labor, which ultimately results in a loss of our jobs. The liberal economic order view, of course, was that we would be the managers and they would be the laborers. Of course, that's not true because there are many Americans who are nothing but laborers. Anyway, I digress. Blah, 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 you get it. In the 1970s, 200,000 to 500,000 Americans reportedly refused to pay the telephone tax, a 10% tax on phone bills that was levied to subsidize the Vietnam War. Larry Rosenwald, then a young man in New York City, was one of them. It was like a gateway drug for war tax resistors. It wasn't very much money, and it wasn't any very drastic action, he said. An IRS agent eventually showed up at his door. He said, and he went when he refused to pay, the agent went to his bank to collect the $25 he owed plus another $25 withdrawal fee. Ha! Let me tell you a story about the IRS, my friends. They are not, well, some people, you don't like them, but they're not demonic. The IRS doesn't come and attack you, and everyone's really scared of the IRS, and it's very strange. It's very, very strange to me. I knew a guy who owned a store. He didn't pay his taxes. The IRS showed up, and they said, Mr. So-and-so, you haven't paid any of your taxes in like 4 years, and you owe us a lot of money. And he said, you know what he said? You know why he didn't pay? He says, I don't have any money. I'm poor. And the IRS guy said, well, you have to pay taxes. And he says, you don't understand. My store doesn't make enough money to stay open and for me to live. And if I paid the taxes you're asking for, I couldn't afford my house or food. And the IRS guy just went, can you give us any money? And he was like, I don't know, $25 maybe. That's what I was going to use for lunch. And the IRS guy said, I'll tell you what, give us $25 a month. And he was like, okay. And said, great, something's better than nothing. And so the issue was, it was a store that was failing. He was like, I'm going to go to business and then I'm going to be homeless. So I choose to pay you or I choose to eat. And the IRS guy was like, okay, well, what can you give us? And he was like, $25. And the IRS guy said, it's fine. Just pay us $25 a month. You know, you're going to accrue a tax bill, of course. And understand, too, the tax is on money made. It's on profit made after the fact. But the dude was just not making money. And he was like, I'll go to business then. And they were like, no. So anyway, the point is when they do finally show up, it's not like they show up to your house and they're like, we're going to arrest you because you're a tax evader. If you're literally committing crimes, then yes, they will. But in my experience, you get a letter in the mail and like, you owe us money, and it's annoying. It's annoying. The worst thing is they send you letters and claiming you owe something, and there's no proof that you actually do. And you're like, I don't even know where this came from. But then it's going to be more expensive to fight it. So you're like, what's the bill, $100? That's my problem with Biden hiring tens of thousands of IRS dudes. But as for the rest of these libs, I sympathize. I have no problem with taxes as a general thought. Like the idea that we as a community provide for the common defense and all of these things. That's fine. I have a problem with our fake tax system that exploits, it's intended to control people. There's punitive taxes like tax on gas and cigarettes, for instance, are designed to make you not want to buy them and to punish you for doing so. We call them punitive taxes. I think all of that is absurd and silly. If you say everyone's going to pitch in $10, so we're going to have a police department, I say, yeah, okay. When you say everyone's going to pitch in $10 every time they buy cigarettes because cigarettes are bad, I'm going to be like, what? Whether I want or don't want cigarettes is my business, not yours. Same thing for gasoline. But I wish them the best of luck, and should many of them get arrested, I'm not going to shed a tear. I'm gonna smash the like button. I'm gonna wrap it up there. You smash the like button, share the show with everyone you've ever met in your life. You can follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast. Thank you all so much for hanging out. More to come throughout the day, and we'll see you all in the next segment.